Welcome to my YouTube history channel, Utrace.
Welcome to this explainer. We are jumping straight into America's explosive transformation from early settlements into an absolute industrial powerhouse. As we go through this today, we're going to keep a really close eye on a core tension that runs through this entire history. It's the ongoing friction between the nation's highest ideals and its harshest realities. It's a fascinating and honestly a pretty complicated story. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 6 major eras of early American history. We'll start with arrival and colonization, move through the road to revolution, building a new nation, expansion and its cost, a nation divided, and finally wrap up with rebuilding and industrialization. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Arrival and colonization. The roots of a nation and its contradictions. So think back to the intense European scramble for territory right after Christopher Columbus's voyages. The year 1607 is a massive turning point. It marks the establishment of Jamestown, Virginia. But let me tell you, it wasn't glorious at all. It was absolutely brutal. Just 104 English settlers faced starvation and disease in this desperate bid for survival. And as these European settlers rapidly expanded, Native American nations fiercely fought to protect their ancestral lands, which led to massive conflicts like the 1622 Powhatan attack. Jamestown barely survived, but it was really just the beginning of a much larger story. Now, one single crop literally changed everything: tobacco. It became this incredibly valuable cash crop that essentially saved the Virginia colony from total financial ruin. But, and this is crucial, it came with a devastating moral compromise. Large tobacco plantations required immense amounts of labor, and this directly caused the massive expansion of racial slavery in the colonies. Africans were forcibly brought across the Atlantic, and this terrible system became the absolute backbone of the economy, setting the stage for the country's greatest future crisis. As English settlements spread out, we see 3 very distinct regional economies taking root. You've got New England building ships, fishing, and trading. Then the middle colonies turn into these bustling hubs for farming and commerce. And the South, well, they doubled down on massive plantation agriculture. But as these 13 colonies grew, a totally new generation of Americans was being born. Living thousands of miles away from London, their everyday lives and businesses grew increasingly separated from British culture and politics. Moving on to Section 2, the road to revolution, breaking ties with Britain. Okay, so picture this. It's the 1750s. Britain just fought a massively expensive war with France, and they are drowning in debt. Their brilliant solution? Decide that the increasingly independent American colonies should foot the bill. So, when the 1765 Stamp Act placed a tax on printed materials, the colonists fired back with a simple, revolutionary demand: no taxation without representation. The logic was clear. If they didn't have elected representatives actually sitting in Parliament, then Parliament had absolutely no right to take their money. From there, the powder keg was officially lit. We see a deadly confrontation at the Boston Massacre in 1770, which is followed by the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Britain responds with an absolute iron fist, right? But that punishment only unites the colonies even further. Until, in April 1775, shots finally rang out at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolution had officially begun. Then we hit July 4th, 1776. The Continental Congress adopts Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Now, it's a soaring, totally revolutionary document, for sure, but it immediately exposes the nation's core contradiction. It promised this incredible ideal of fundamental liberty, yet at the exact same time, it turned a blind eye to thriving slavery and completely excluded Native Americans. It was a high-minded promise that America would literally spend generations struggling to actually live up to. Going up against a global superpower like Britain, the Americans were completely outgunned and totally underfunded. But they had George Washington's sheer grit, and maybe more importantly, a crucial influx of French weapons, money, and naval support. This vital alliance turned the tide, leading directly to the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781. And by 1783, with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the United States was officially a free nation. Section 3. Building a new nation. Structuring the government. So the war is won. But actually governing this massive debt-ridden new nation, it was chaotic. Under their weak first government, the states were constantly at each other's throats. But then comes the brilliant solution, the 1787 Constitution drafted in Philadelphia. They intentionally divided power into 3 balancing branches. You have Congress to make the laws, the president to lead the executive branch, and the courts to interpret the law. This ensured no single group could dominate the others. And with this framework locked in, George Washington stepped up as the very first president. Next up, Section 4, Expansion and its Cost, Growing Westward. All right, so the 1803 Louisiana Purchase from France basically doubles the nation's size overnight, and that sparks a powerful new ideology in the 1840s known as Manifest Destiny. People truly believed Americans were divinely meant to span the entire North American continent. This fierce momentum is what sparked the annexation of Texas in 1845 and the Mexican-American War in 1846, eventually stretching the country's borders all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But we really need to pause here for a second, because that rapid expansion came at a devastating human cost. You see, those Western lands were not empty. Under policies like President Andrew Jackson's 1830 Indian Removal Act, Native American nations were systematically ripped from their ancestral homes. Thousands of people suffered and died on brutal, forced marches, which we most notably remember today as the Trail of Tears. America was growing incredibly fast, but the human toll was simply catastrophic. That brings us to Section 5, A Nation Divided, the Breaking Point. Stretching all the way from the Atlantic to the Pacific, pushed the country's regional political friction right to the breaking point. Think about it. Every single time a new Western territory was added, it triggered one incredibly explosive question. Would slavery be allowed there? Political compromises kept trying to cool the tensions down, but the underlying conflict over human bondage was entirely unresolved, and it was growing more volatile by the day. You have to understand, the country was fracturing because it was essentially running on two totally incompatible economies. Up in the north, things are modernizing rapidly. They are building factories, sprawling railroad networks, and bustling commercial cities. Meanwhile, the south is completely doubling down on plantation agriculture, specifically cotton, which was entirely reliant on the forced labor of millions of enslaved African Americans. So the power keg is filling up with the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act and the infamous 1857 Dred Scott decision. But the match is finally struck in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected. A man explicitly opposing the expansion of slavery, Southern leaders felt their entire economic and political system was under an existential threat. By December of that year, South Carolina seceded, and they were very quickly followed by others to form the Confederacy. For 4 incredibly bloody years, a brutal civil war literally rips the country apart. Now, initially, Lincoln's only goal was to preserve the Union, but by 1863, with the Emancipation Proclamation, the entire fundamental purpose of the war shifts completely to ending slavery. Following some highly decisive Union victories, Confederate General Robert E. Lee finally surrendered in April 1865. The Union had survived. Finally, Section 6, Rebuilding and Industrialization, a New Era. So the war is over, right? But the aftermath is incredibly chaotic. President Lincoln is tragically assassinated just days after the surrender. And yeah, while the 13th Amendment legally abolishes slavery, the reality of true equality is stifled by generations of ongoing systemic discrimination and violence during Reconstruction. Yet physically speaking, the country was charging headfirst into the modern age. They connect the coasts with the 1869 Transcontinental Railroad and start building these massive, towering cities fueled by steel, coal, and oil. America was rapidly transforming into a wealthy industrial powerhouse. If there is one absolutely crucial takeaway from our explainer today, it's that America's rise is just incredibly complex. It's not a simple story. It was undeniably built on brilliant invention, massive industry, and these truly revolutionary political ideals. But it was equally built on colonization, the forced removal of native peoples, the absolute horrors of slavery, brutal war, and a relentless ongoing fight for basic justice. I want to leave you with a final thought today. The entire history of the United States is essentially a constant struggle to define what freedom and democracy actually mean in practice. So, moving forward into the 20th century, how would this deep, foundational tension between its highest ideals and its harshest realities continue to test the nation as it stepped onto the global stage? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today.
Your support means a lot. See you in the next video.